They say money can't buy class, but at the Obsidian, it can certainly buy silence. 4 men walked in, wearing suits that cost more than most people earn in a year. They ordered the most expensive wine, ate the finest steak, and treated their waitress, Clara, like something they'd scraped off their Italian leather shoes. They laughed as they ran up a $10,000 tab, planning to leave her with nothing but a cruel joke. But they didn't know who was sitting in the corner booth, watching every single move. They didn't know that the man they were trying to impress was about to serve them a dish that wasn't on the menu. Total, absolute ruin. Watch what happens when arrogance meets reality. The dinner rush at the Obsidian was not merely a shift. It was a battlefield of egos, clinking crystal, and the overpowering scent of truffle oil masking the sweat of the staff. Clara Mitchell adjusted the collar of her uniform, wincing as the stiff fabric rubbed against the sunburn on her neck, a souvenir from walking 3 miles to work because her 2008 Honda Civic had finally given up the ghost that morning. At 24, Clara had the tired eyes of someone twice her age. Her bank account balance sat at exactly $42.15. The rent was due in 3 days, but that wasn't the number that kept her awake at night. It was the $12,000 needed for her younger brother's orthopedic surgery. Every shift, every tip, every forced smile was a drop in a bucket that refused to fill. "Table 4, Clara," the maitre d', a sharp-nosed man named Frederick, snapped as he breezed past her. "VIPs, don't mess this up. They specifically requested a server who doesn't look like a model. They want focus, not distraction. Just serve." Clara nodded, swallowing her pride. Just serve. She glanced at table 4. It was the prime spot, the circular booth near the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the glittering skyline of Chicago. 4 men sat there. They took up space with an aggression that was almost palpable. There was Carter Kensington, a hedge fund manager whose face had graced the cover of Forbes as a 30 under 30 prodigy. He wore a navy Brioni suit and had a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. Next to him was Preston Hayes, the son of a tech mogul, wearing a Patek Philippe watch that likely cost more than the restaurant itself. He was loud, boisterous, and already 3 drinks deep. Across from them sat Sterling Pike and Harrison O'Malley. They were the followers, wealthy, yes, but desperate to stay in Carter's orbit. They mimicked his posture, laughed when he laughed, and sneered when he sneered. Clara took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and approached the table. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Welcome to the Obsidian. My name is Clara, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with water?" Carter interrupted, not even looking up from his phone. He held a finger up, silencing her. "Sparkling. Not the house brand. Bring us 2 bottles of the Chateau, and make sure the glasses are chilled. Actually chilled, not just rinsed in cold water." "Of course, sir," Clara said, writing it down. "And bread," Preston added, leaning back and looking her up and down with a sneer. "But only if it's fresh. If it's been sitting under a heat lamp for 10 minutes, don't bother. I have a very sensitive palate." Sterling and Harrison chuckled, as if Preston had just told the world's wittiest joke. "I'll check with the kitchen personally to ensure it's fresh out of the oven," Clara replied politely. "You do that?" Carter said, finally looking at her. His gaze was dismissive, stripping her of her humanity and reducing her to a utility. "And hurry up. We have business to discuss, and I don't like waiting for hydration." Clara hurried to the service bar. Her hands shook slightly as she grabbed the tray. She knew this type. They were the sharks, men who made their fortunes tearing companies apart and didn't see service staff as people, but as NPCs in their game of life. She returned with the water and the chilled glasses. As she poured for Carter, he suddenly shifted his elbow, jerking the table. A fefew drops of the expensive water splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. It was a tiny spot, barely the size of a dime. Carter slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a gunshot. "Are you incompetent?" Carter hissed, his voice low but venomous. The entire section went quiet. I'm so sorry, sir," Clara stammered, grabbing her service towel. "You moved, and I moved?" Carter laughed, a cruel, dry sound. He looked at his friends. "Did you hear that? She's blaming the customer. Is that how they train you here? To blame the people paying your salary?" "No, sir, I didn't mean—" "Leave it," Carter commanded, pointing at the wet spot. "Don't wipe it. Leave it there. I want to look at it. I want a reminder of why I don't tip incompetent people." Preston snickered. "Maybe she's nervous, Carter. Being this close to a net worth like ours can be intimidating for the help." Clara felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the tray down and walk out. But the image of her brother, limping in pain, flashed in her mind. "I need this job. I need the tips." "I apologize, gentlemen," Clara whispered. "I will bring the menus." As she turned to leave, she heard Harrison whisper loud enough for her to hear. $500 says she cries before the appetizers arrive. "You're on," Carter replied. The kitchen was a haven of controlled chaos, but for Clara, it was a sanctuary. She leaned against the stainless steel counter, taking a trembling breath. "You okay, Clara?" asked Marco, the sous chef, pausing while plating a sea bass. "Table 4, she muttered. "They're betting on when I'll cry." Marco cursed under his breath. "Rich kids playing God. Just ignore them. Get their money and get them out. The owner is supposed to be coming in tonight, by the way. Old man Blackwood." Clara looked up. "The billionaire, the one who owns the holding company." "Yeah, he's usually low-key. Sits in the back, eats alone. Just keep your head down." Clara nodded, steeling herself. She couldn't worry about a billionaire owner. She had 4 millionaires to survive first. She returned to the table. The men were laughing raucously, their ties loosened. They were already celebrating a deal that hadn't closed yet. "We're ready," Carter announced without looking at the menu. "We're going to do the tasting menu, but we want modifications." The tasting menu is designed by the chef to be experienced as is, Clara explained gently. "However, I can note allergies." "No allergies," Preston waved his hand. "We just want better ingredients. For the Wagyu course, swap the A4 for the A5 Kobe. For the lobster thermidor, we want triple the caviar. And for the wine pairing," Carter paused, a wicked glint in his eye. "We don't want the standard pairing. Bring us the 82 Petrus." Clara froze. The 1982 Chateau Petrus was the most expensive bottle in the cellar. It cost $6,000. "Sir, that bottle is—" "Is what?" Carter challenged. "Too expensive for us. Do you think we can't afford it?" "Not at all," Clara said quickly. "It just requires decanting for at least 45 minutes to open up properly." "Then start pouring," Carter snapped. "And while you're doing that, bring us another round of appetizers, the oysters, 4 dozen. The next hour was a grueling exercise in humiliation. When Clara brought the oysters, Harrison claimed one tasted off and demanded she take the entire platter back, even though they had eaten all but one. She did. When she poured the $6,000 wine, Preston criticized her pouring technique, claiming she was bruising the vintage by tilting the bottle 2 degrees too sharp. They sent back the soup because it was too hot. They sent back the salad because the dressing was too acidic. Every time she approached the table, they stopped talking to stare at her, making comments about her uniform, her hair, her shoes. "You know," Carter said, swirling the priceless wine in his glass as Clara cleared the appetizer plates. "You have a decent face. It's a shame about the everything else. Have you ever considered a job that doesn't require thinking? Maybe scrubbing floors?" Clara gripped the dirty plate so hard her knuckles turned white. "I take pride in my work, sir." "Pride?" Carter laughed, looking at Sterling. "She has pride. That's adorable. Pride is for people who have assets, darling. You have debt. I can smell it on you. Cheap soap and desperation." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. Harrison looked at his watch and grinned. "Getting close to payout time, boys." Clara turned away quickly, blinking back the tears. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She walked briskly toward the back of the restaurant, her vision blurring. In her haste, she didn't see the man sitting in the small, shadowy booth near the kitchen doors. He was an older gentleman, perhaps in his late 60s, wearing a simple, slightly worn tweed jacket. He was reading a paperback book and nursing a glass of house red. As Clara rushed past, she clipped the edge of his table, knocking the salt shaker over. "Oh, I am so sorry," Clara gasped, stopping to catch the shaker before it rolled off. The older man looked up. He had kind, piercing blue eyes and a shock of white hair. He looked at Clara's face, seeing the unshed tears and the red flush of humiliation. "No harm done, my dear," the man said. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the sharp barks of the men at table 4. "Rough night?" "You have no idea," Clara whispered, forcing a smile. "Just some difficult customers." "The loud ones by the window?" the man asked, glancing toward the quartet of hyenas. "Yes, but I shouldn't be complaining. I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. Can I get you anything else?" The man looked at her for a long moment. He saw the fraying on her cuff, the exhaustion in her posture, and the genuine kindness she was trying to maintain despite the abuse. "Actually," the man said, closing his book, "I'm just waiting for a friend. But tell me, are they really treating you that badly?" Clara hesitated. She wasn't supposed to gossip about guests, but there was something about this man. Something safe. "They bet on when I would cry," she confessed, her voice trembling, "and they told me pride is only for people with money." The old man's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened slightly. The warmth remained, but a steeliness entered his gaze. "Is that so?" he murmured. "Pride is only for people with money." He repeated the phrase as if tasting a rotten grape. "Well, Clara, is that your name?" "Yes, sir." "Hang in there, Clara. The night isn't over yet." Clara nodded and rushed back to the kitchen. She didn't know who the old man was. He looked like a retired grandfather enjoying a quiet meal. She certainly didn't suspect that the friend he was waiting for didn't exist, or that he had been sitting there for an hour, listening to every word Carter Kensington had shouted across the room. Back at table 4, the main course had arrived. The bill was currently sitting at $8,000, and the real game was about to begin. By the time the dessert course arrived, the atmosphere at table 4 had shifted from boisterous to something darker, heavier. The air around the booth smelled of spilled cognac, expensive cologne, and the sour scent of unrestrained ego. The table was a graveyard of excess. The empty bottle of 1982 Petrus sat like a trophy in the center, flanked by half-eaten plates of A5 Wagyu beef that they had ordered merely to taste and discard. They had ordered the baked Alaska, a flaming spectacle of a dessert, only to ignore it while it melted into a sugary puddle on the china. Clara stood at the service station, her legs throbbing. She checked the point-of-sale system. The total bill was staggering, 14,250 centavos. The automatic gratuity had been removed by the manager, Frederick, at Carter's aggressive insistence earlier in the night, meaning Clara's tip was entirely at the mercy of these 4 men. "Take the check to them," Frederick hissed, appearing at her elbow. He was sweating. "And for God's sake, smile. If they contest the bill, the owner will have my head. We need that revenue." Clara nodded, picking up the leather check presenter. It felt like it weighed 100 pounds. She took a deep breath, plastered a trembling smile onto her face, and walked toward the window. "Gentlemen," she said softly, placing the leather folder on the table. "Whenever you are ready. No rush." She turned to leave, hoping to retreat to the safety of the kitchen, but Carter's voice stopped her cold. "Wait." Clara froze. She turned back. Carter hadn't opened the folder. He was leaning back, picking his teeth with a gold-plated toothpick, staring at her with predatory amusement. "You think the night is over?" Carter asked. "You think you drop a piece of paper and walk away?" I can process the payment whenever you're ready, sir," Clara said. Carter laughed. He looked at Preston, then at Harrison and Sterling. They all exchanged a look that made Clara's blood run cold. It was the look of schoolyard bullies who had cornered a stray cat. "We have a policy," Preston said, swirling the last dregs of his cognac. "We don't pay for dissatisfaction. And frankly, Clara, can I call you Clara? This entire evening has been a disaster." "I apologize if things weren't to your liking," Clara said, her voice shaking. "I tried my best to—" "Your best?" Carter interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. "Your best was pathetic. The water spot, the pouring technique, the attitude. You radiated poverty, and it ruined our appetite." Carter finally reached for the check folder. He flipped it open, glanced at the 14,000-odd total, and didn't even blink. To him, that amount was what he made in 10 minutes of trading. But this wasn't about money. It was about power. He pulled out a sleek, black American Express Centurion card. He tapped it on the table. "Here is the situation," Carter said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I am going to pay this bill, because I am a generous man. But," he paused, dangling the card in the air, "I am not going to tip you, not a single cent." Clara felt her stomach drop. 8 hours of abuse, $14,000 in sales. A standard 20% tip would have been $2,800. That money was the surgery. That money was her brother walking again. "However," Carter continued, a cruel smile spreading across his face, "I am willing to make a deal. I have $1,000 cash in my pocket right now." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of crisp $100 bills. He fanned them out on the dirty tablecloth next to the melting dessert. "This is yours," Carter said. "Tax-free, instant cash. All you have to do is earn it." Clara stared at the money. It was degrading. It was disgusting. But she thought of the eviction notice on her counter. She thought of her brother's pained expression when he tried to stand up. "What do I have to do?" she whispered. The 4 men erupted in laughter. "See?" Harrison cackled. "Everyone has a price. I told you." "Simple," Carter said, leaning forward. "Get on your knees." The restaurant seemed to go silent. The clinking of silverware at other tables faded into a dull roar in Clara's ears. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Carter said coldly. "Get on your knees, right here on the floor, and apologize, sincerely. Beg us for forgiveness for ruining our dinner. Beg us for the money. If you do it convincingly enough, the cash is yours." Clara looked around. The restaurant was full. People were eating, laughing, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding at table 4. She looked at Frederick, the manager, who was watching from the podium. He saw what was happening. He turned his head away, pretending to check the reservation book. He wasn't going to save her. I can't do that, Clara stammered, tears finally spilling over. Then no money, Carter said, shrugging. He reached for the cash to put it away. Wait! The word ripped out of her throat before she could stop it. Desperation was a physical pain in her chest. She needed that money. She needed it more than she needed her dignity. Slowly, agonizingly, Clara lowered herself. Her knees hit the hardwood floor. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. She bowed her head, the tears dripping onto her apron. I'm sorry, she sobbed, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry I didn't serve you well enough. Please, please forgive me. The table was silent for a second. Then the sound of a camera shutter clicking. Clara looked up. Preston was holding his phone, recording her. Gold, Preston laughed. This is going on the group chat. The begging waitress. Carter looked down at her, his face a mask of absolute indifference. He picked up the stack of cash. You know, he said musingly, that was pathetic, truly pathetic. But I'm a man of my word regarding the deal. However, he tossed the stack of bills into the air. They weren't real. As the paper fluttered down around Clara's kneeling form, she saw the text on the bills. Motion picture, use only. It was prop money, fake cash used for movies. Lesson number 1, sweetheart, Carter sneered, standing up and buttoning his jacket. Always check the assets before you sign the contract. We don't owe you anything. The 4 men roared with laughter, high-fiving each other as Clara knelt amidst the fake money, shattered, broken, and utterly humiliated. The sound of their laughter was like broken glass in Clara's ears. She remained on the floor for a moment, too stunned to move, surrounded by the worthless paper that mocked her desperation. Finally, the adrenaline of shame kicked in. She scrambled to her feet, her face burning, wiping the tears furiously from her cheeks. You are monsters, she whispered. Carter, who was adjusting his silk tie in the reflection of the window, turned to her with a look of mock surprise. Monsters? No, darling. We are the economy. We are the reason you have a job. You should be thanking us for the lesson. I'm calling the police, Clara said, her voice rising, attracting the attention of nearby tables. You can't treat people like this. Call them, Sterling challenged, stepping forward to loom over her. Who do you think they'll believe? 4 pillars of the Chicago financial community, or a hysterical waitress who tried to extort us for a tip? At that moment, Frederick, the manager, rushed over. He didn't look at Clara. He looked exclusively at Carter. Mr. Kensington, is there a problem? Frederick asked, his voice trembling with the desire to please. Yes, Frederick, there is, Carter said, smoothing his lapels. Your waitress is unstable. She just caused a scene, begged us for money, and is now threatening us. We are leaving, and we are not paying the bill. Consider it compensation for the emotional distress of dealing with this lunatic. Frederick paled. Sir, the bill is $14,000. Send it to my legal department if you want to fight it, Carter snapped. But I warn you, my lawyers charge $1,000 an hour. It'll cost you more to sue me than the bill is worth. Or, Carter gestured to Clara, you can deduct it from her paycheck for the next 5 years. I don't care. We're leaving. The 4 men turned to walk out, leaving a wake of devastation. Frederick turned on Clara, his face red with panic. You, Frederick snarled, you foolish girl, you provoked them. Do you know who they are? Get out! You're fired. Get your things and leave, now. Clara felt the room spin. Fired. No money. No surgery. Just humiliation. She turned to run to the back, to escape, to vanish. Sit down, Clara. The voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that cut through the noise of the restaurant, like a heavy anchor hitting the ocean floor. It was a baritone rumble, calm, authoritative, and impossible to ignore. Everyone froze. In the small booth near the kitchen, the old man in the tweed jacket had stood up. He wasn't looking at his book anymore. He had placed his glasses on the table and was standing in the middle of the aisle, blocking the exit path of the 4 rich men. Carter Kensington stopped, nearly bumping into the old man. He looked down at the frayed tweed jacket, the scuffed shoes, and the messy white hair. "Excuse me, Grandpa," Carter said, dismissing him with a wave. "You're in the way. Move." The old man didn't move. He stood with his feet planted shoulder-width apart, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He looked like a retired professor, harmless and gentle. But his eyes, steely blue and sharp as diamonds, were locked onto Carter's face. "I believe you forgot something," the old man said. His voice was steady, lacking any fear. "We didn't forget anything," Preston scoffed, stepping up beside Carter. "Get out of the way before we have security move you. This is a private conversation." "You forgot to pay," the old man said, "and you forgot to apologize to the young lady." The 4 men burst into incredulous laughter. "Is this a joke?" Harrison asked, looking around. "Is this the restaurant's security? A geriatric in a thrift store coat?" Carter stepped closer to the old man, invading his personal space. Carter was tall, 6'2", but the old man didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just held Carter's gaze with a terrifying calmness. "Listen to me, old man," Carter sneered. "I own this city. I make more money in a day than you have made in your entire pathetic life. I don't pay for garbage, and I don't apologize to servants. Now move, or I will buy the nursing home you live in and evict you just for sport." The old man tilted his head slightly. A small, dry smile touched his lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a chess master who sees checkmate 10 moves ahead. "You own this city?" the old man repeated softly. "That's an interesting perspective, Mr. Kensington. Does your father know you talk like this? Or is he too busy trying to cover up the insider trading investigation at Kensington Global?" The color drained from Carter's face instantly. The arrogance vanished, replaced by shock. "What did you say?" Carter whispered. The old man shifted his gaze to Preston. "And you, Mr. Hayes. Preston, isn't it? How is the new tech startup going? The one supposedly developing AI? I heard the SEC is very interested in why your proprietary algorithm is actually just a sweatshop of underpaid coders in the Philippines. Fraud is a messy business, son." Preston dropped his phone. It clattered on the floor. The restaurant was dead silent now. Even the kitchen staff had come out to watch. Frederick was frozen, his mouth open. "Who are you?" Sterling Pike asked, his voice trembling. He was the only one the old man hadn't addressed yet. The old man ignored him and turned his attention back to Carter. He took a step forward, and for the first time, the young, arrogant hedge fund manager took a step back. Fear flickered in his eyes. "You think money is power?" the old man said, his voice rising just enough to reach the back of the room. "You think wearing a suit and bullying a waitress makes you a king. But you are not kings. You are children playing with your father's credit cards. You asked if I knew who you were. The answer is yes. I know exactly who you are. I know your fathers. I know your investors. And I know your secrets." "Who are you?" Carter demanded again, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "How do you know that?" "You threatened to buy this restaurant," the old man said, looking around the opulent dining room. "You can't." "Why not?" Carter challenged, trying to regain his footing. "I can buy anything. "You can't buy it," the old man said, "because I already own it." He reached into his tweed jacket pocket. The four men flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon. But he pulled out a simple, worn leather wallet. He extracted a black card, not the plastic American Express Centurion Carter had flashed, but a heavy, matte metal card made of solid titanium. It had no numbers, only a single gold insignia in the center. A lion. "I am Arthur Blackwood," the old man stated. The air left the room. Arthur Blackwood. The name was legendary. He wasn't just a billionaire, he was the billionaire, the titan of Chicago. He owned the skyline. He owned the banks these men worked for. He owned the land their luxury condos were built on. He was a man who rarely appeared in public, a recluse who controlled the city's economy from the shadows, and he had been sitting 10 feet away, eating a burger, watching them humiliate his employee for 2 hours. Mr. Blackwood," Carter stammered. He looked like he was going to vomit. We didn't know. We were just having some fun. It was a joke." "A joke," Blackwood repeated flatly. He turned to Clara, who was standing by the service station, clutching her apron, eyes wide with shock. "Clara," Blackwood said gently. "Come here, please." Clara walked forward, her legs shaking. She stood next to the billionaire, feeling small but strangely protected. "Was it funny to you, Clara?" Blackwood asked, looking at her with genuine concern. "When they made you kneel? When they threw fake money at you? Was that a joke?" "No, sir," Clara whispered. Blackwood turned back to the four men. His face hardened into stone. "It doesn't seem funny to her," Blackwood said. "And it certainly isn't funny to me. You refused to pay your bill. You breached the contract of service, and you assaulted the dignity of my staff." "We'll pay," Carter said quickly, fumbling for his wallet. His hands were shaking so hard, he dropped his credit card. "We'll pay right now. Double, triple, just... Please, Mr. Blackwood, my father." "Put your money away," Blackwood barked. The sound was like a whip crack. "I don't want your money. Your money is dirty. I want something else." "Anything," Preston squeaked. "You like games," Blackwood said, unbuttoning his tweed jacket to reveal a crisp, tailored shirt underneath. "You like making people work for their survival. You like humiliation. So we are going to play a game." He pointed to the dirty table, the spilled wine, the melted dessert, and the fake money scattered on the floor. "You made a mess," Blackwood said, "and tonight the staff is off duty." He looked at Frederick. "Frederick, bring me 4 aprons and 4 buckets of soapy water, and bring the mops, the ones from the back, the dirty ones." "Sir?" Frederick asked, bewildered. "You heard me," Blackwood said, his eyes locking onto Carter. "You boys want to leave this building with your careers intact. You want to make sure I don't make one phone call to your fathers and your CEOs tomorrow morning that will blacklist you from every financial institution in the Western Hemisphere?" Carter swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Then take off your jackets," Blackwood commanded. "Roll up your sleeves. You aren't leaving until this restaurant is spotless. Every floor, every dish, every toilet." Carter stared at him. "You want us to clean?" "I want you to serve," Blackwood corrected. "I want you to understand what it feels like to clean up someone else's mess." "And Clara?" "Yes, sir," Clara breathed. Blackwood smiled, a genuine warm smile this time. "Pull up a chair, my dear. You're the manager for the rest of the night. If they miss a spot, you let me know." The transformation of the Obsidian from a temple of fine dining to a theater of retribution was immediate and surreal. The other diners had been quietly asked to leave, their meals comped by the house. Most lingered by the coat check or peered through the front windows, sensing that the real show was just beginning. Frederick, the manager, looked like a man marching to the gallows. He returned from the back carrying 4 industrial-grade aprons, heavy, rubberized things usually worn by the dishwasher during the Sunday brunch rush. They smelled of bleach and old grease. He threw them on the floor in front of the 4 men. "Put them on," Arthur Blackwood ordered. He had taken a seat at table 4, their table. Clara sat opposite him. A fresh pot of tea had been brought out, poured by Marco, the sous chef, who was grinning ear to ear. Carter Kensington stared at the rubber apron as if it were radioactive. He had removed his bespoke Italian jacket, revealing a silk dress shirt that was already damp with sweat. "Mr. Blackwood," Carter pleaded, his voice cracking. This is illegal. You can't force us to work. It's false imprisonment." Arthur took a calm sip of chamomile tea. "You are free to leave at any moment, Mr. Kensington. The door is unlocked. But the moment you step through that door without finishing the job, I make the call to your father. And I make a call to the ethics board at the exchange. It's your choice. Freedom or a future." Carter looked at the door. It was 20 feet away. It might as well have been on the moon. He knew Blackwood wasn't bluffing. Arthur Blackwood didn't become the wealthiest man in Chicago by making idle threats. With a shaking hand, Carter picked up the rubber apron. He tied it around his waist. It clashed violently with his $400 trousers. Preston, Sterling, and Harrison followed suit. They looked like terrified children playing dress-up in a nightmare. "The bucket," Blackwood pointed. "Start with the floor. Specifically, the spot where you forced Clara to kneel. I want it scrubbed until I can see my reflection in the wood." Preston grabbed a mop. He held it awkwardly, like he was holding a dead snake. He had likely never held a cleaning implement in his life. He dipped it into the soapy water and slapped it onto the floor, splashing grey water onto his Gucci loafers. "No," Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. The 4 men stopped and looked at her. Clara sat straighter in her chair. She remembered the humiliation, the feeling of the hard wood against her knees, the fake money fluttering down. But looking at them now, sweating, terrified, pathetic, she didn't feel hate. She felt pity. They were hollow men. "That's not how you mop," Clara said, standing up. She walked over to Preston. "You're just pushing the dirt around. You have to put your weight into it. Use the scrubber for the spot." She pointed to the coarse bristle brush attached to the bucket. Preston looked at her, then at Blackwood. Blackwood nodded. Preston got down on his hands and knees, the same knees he had stood on while laughing at her. He grabbed the brush and began to scrub. "Harder," Clara said softly. "It's a stubborn stain. Arrogance usually is." For the next 2 hours, the lords of Chicago worked. It was a grueling spectacle. Carter was assigned the bathrooms. The man who wouldn't drink water unless it was chilled to a specific degree was now on his knees, scrubbing the porcelain of the public toilets. He gagged repeatedly, his face turning a sickly shade of green. Harrison and Sterling were sent to the dish pit. They stood in front of the steaming industrial sprayer, scraping half-eaten food off plates. The hot water ruined their manicures. The steam wilted their collars. At one point, Harrison dropped a stack of plates, shattering them. He flinched, waiting for the screaming. "Careful," Blackwood called out from the dining room, not even looking up from his conversation with Clara. "That's coming out of your tips." The kitchen staff watched in silence, a mixture of awe and vindication on their faces. For years they had been invisible to men like this. Now, they were the audience. By 1 a.m., the restaurant was silent. The floors gleamed. The dishes were stacked. The bathroom smelled of lemon and shame. The 4 men stood in a line before table 4. They were ruined. Their shirts were stained. Their hair was matted with sweat. and their hands were red and raw. They breathed heavily, their shoulders slumped. Carter stepped forward. He looked 10 years older than he had when he walked in. "We're done," he croaked. "It's clean. Can we go now?" Arthur Blackwood stood up. He inspected the floor. He walked to the kitchen and ran a finger along the counter. He checked the reflection in the window. He turned back to them. "You missed a spot," Blackwood said. "Where?" Carter cried, near hysteria. "I scrubbed everything. I scrubbed the grout with a toothbrush." "You cleaned the building," Blackwood said, tapping his chest over his heart. "But you haven't cleaned the slate. There is one final transaction to be made." Blackwood reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the prop money, the fake $100 bills Carter had thrown at Clara. He had picked them up off the floor earlier. He tossed the stack onto the table. "You tried to buy a human being's dignity with counterfeit paper," Blackwood said quietly. "You thought it was a game. You thought her struggle was funny." He looked at Clara. She was tired, her adrenaline fading. "Clara told me earlier that she needed this job," Blackwood continued. "She told me she has a brother who needs surgery, orthopedic surgery, $12,000. Is that correct, Clara?" Clara nodded, tears welling up again. "Yes, sir. His name is Toby. He was in a car accident last year." Blackwood turned his gaze back to Carter. "You spent $14,000 on dinner tonight. You spent more on wine and steak in 2 hours than it would cost to fix a young boy's legs. And you refused to pay. You tried to cheat the house." "I'll pay the bill," Carter said quickly. "I have my card, the real one." "The bill is comped," Blackwood said. "I own the place. I can do that. But you still owe a debt. And today, the exchange rate has gone up." Blackwood pulled out a fountain pen and a napkin. He scribbled a number on it. $50,000, Blackwood said. "What?" Preston gasped. "Each," Blackwood added. Silence stretched thin and tight across the room. "You want us to pay $200,000? Carter asked, his eyes bulging. "Consider it a consulting fee," Blackwood said, his voice hard as iron. "For the life lesson I just taught you. You four are going to write a check, right now, made out to the Tobias Mitchell Medical Fund. $50,000 each. That is $200,000 total. That covers the surgery. It covers the rehabilitation. It covers his college tuition. And it covers the pain and suffering you inflicted on his sister tonight." "I don't carry a checkbook," Sterling stammered. "Then you will do a wire transfer," Blackwood said. "I know you have the banking apps on your phones. Do it. Now." The men hesitated. It was an exorbitant amount of money, even for them. "Or," Blackwood said, reaching for his phone. "I call your father, Carter. I tell him about the incident tonight, and I tell him about the offshore account in the Caymans you've been using to skim off the top of your hedge fund." Carter went pale white. How do you—" "I know everything, boy. I am the money. Now transfer the funds." Carter fumbled for his phone so fast he almost dropped it. The others followed. For the next 5 minutes, the only sound was the tapping of screens and the quiet confirmations of wire transfers. Clara stood frozen. She watched as the notifications popped up on her phone. She had set up a donation link for Toby months ago, which had sat empty until now. Ping, $50,000 received. Ping, $50,000 received. Ping, $50,000 received. Ping, $50,000 received. She covered her mouth with her hands. It wasn't just the surgery. It was a life. It was freedom. "It's done," Carter whispered. "We sent it." Blackwood checked Clara's phone. He nodded. "Good. Now get out of my sight." The 4 men didn't wait. They didn't grab their jackets. They didn't look back. They ran for the door, stumbling into the cool Chicago night, stripped of their pride, their arrogance, and a significant chunk of their liquidity. The door swung shut behind them, leaving the restaurant peaceful once again. Arthur Blackwood sighed and sat back down. He looked at the manager, Frederick, who was trying to blend into the wallpaper near the kitchen door. "Frederick," Blackwood said. Frederick jumped. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood?" "You watched them abuse her," Blackwood said. "You watched them throw water on the table. You watched them harass her. And when they refused to pay, you blamed her. You fired her." "Sir, I was trying to manage the situation. They were VIPs." "In my establishments," Blackwood said, standing up and buttoning his tweed jacket. "The staff are the VIPs. The customers are guests. If the guests don't know how to behave, they are removed. You failed to protect your team. You chose money over integrity." Frederick hung his head. "You're fired, Frederick," Blackwood said simply. "Pack your office. You won't be working in this city again. I'll make sure of it." Frederick didn't argue. He knew the power of the lion. He turned and walked away, a defeated man. The silence that descended upon the obsidian was heavy, but it was no longer oppressive. It was the kind of silence that follows a violent storm. The air felt scrubbed clean, charged with the ozone of sudden, irrevocable change. The four men were gone. The only evidence they had ever been there was the lingering scent of industrial bleach from their forced labor, and the four empty chairs at table 4, pushed back in haste. Clara sat in the booth, her hands resting on the cool mahogany table. Her phone sat in front of her, the screen glowing in the dim ambient light. She stared at the banking app notification, watching the cursor blink next to the balance. 200,000 or so cess. It wasn't just a number, it was oxygen. It was the absence of the crushing weight that had sat on her chest every morning for 2 years. Marco, the sous chef, stepped out from the kitchen. He had removed his toque and was wiping his hands on a rag. He walked over to the table, looking from the floor where the rich men had scrubbed, to Clara, and finally to Arthur Blackwood. "I've seen a lot of things in 20 years of cooking," Marco said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've seen fights, proposals, and fires, but I have never seen justice served quite like that." Arthur Blackwood didn't smile. He sat with the stillness of a statue, his hands clasped over the handle of his cane. He looked tired, the adrenaline of the confrontation fading to reveal the age in his eyes. "Justice is a dish best served immediately," Blackwood murmured. He looked at Clara. "You're shaking, my dear." Clara looked down at her hands. They were trembling violently. I don't know what to say. Mr. Blackwood, this money, I can't keep this. It's extortion. If they go to the police, they won't go to the police." Blackwood interrupted, his voice calm and reassuring. "Men like Carter Kensington fear only 2 things: poverty and irrelevance. Going to the police would require admitting they were bested by a waitress and an old man. It would require admitting they scrubbed toilets. Their egos will bury this story deeper than I ever could. The money is yours. Consider it a hazard pay bonus for the last 5 years of your life." Clara swallowed hard, tears finally spilling over. She didn't wipe them away this time. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why did you do this? You're a billionaire. You could have just fired Frederick and comped the meal. Why did you make them? Why did you fight for me?" Arthur sighed. He reached into the inside pocket of his tweed jacket. The movement was slow, deliberate. He pulled out a small, worn leather wallet and extracted a photograph. It was black and white, creased at the corners, showing signs of having been held and looked at thousands of times. He slid it across the table to Clara. The photo showed a young woman standing in front of a 1950s diner. She wore a uniform similar to Clara's, an apron, sensible shoes, hair tied back. She looked exhausted, leaning against the doorframe, but her smile was radiant. "That is Eleanor," Arthur said softly. "My mother." Clara looked at the woman's eyes. They held the same mix of fatigue and defiance that Clara saw in the mirror every day. "She raised me alone," Arthur continued, his gaze drifting to the city skyline beyond the window. "My father left before I was born. She worked double shifts at a diner just like this, 6 days a week, for 40 years. She came home with swollen ankles and burns on her arms from the fryer." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "I used to sit in a booth doing my homework while she worked. I watched men in suits, men with money, treat her like she was invisible. I watched them snap their fingers at her. I watched them grab her arm. I watched them leave pennies as a tip because the soup was cold. The restaurant was deadly silent. Even Marco had stopped moving. One night, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper, a man threw a drink in her face because she got his order wrong. He laughed. He called her stupid. And do you know what she did? She apologized. She wiped her face. She smiled, and she got him another drink. Because she needed the job. Because she had to feed me. Clara felt a sob rise in her throat. She touched the photo gently. "I was 10 years old," Arthur said, looking back at Clara with intense blue eyes. "And I made a promise that night. I promised that I would become so powerful, so wealthy, that no one would ever be able to hurt us again. I built an empire, Clara. I own half this city. But every time I walk into one of my restaurants, I look for her. I look for the people who are doing the work while the world ignores them." He leaned forward. "Tonight, when they made you kneel, I didn't see you. I saw Eleanor, and I swore a long time ago that I would never let anyone make her kneel again." Clara couldn't speak. She simply nodded, overwhelmed by the history and the heart of the man sitting across from her. "You have her spirit," Arthur added, pocketing the photo. "You have dignity. Money can be printed, Clara. Dignity cannot. That is why you won tonight." Arthur stood up, buttoning his jacket. The spell was broken, but the warmth remained. "Now," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "Frederick is gone. I meant what I said. He will not be returning." "Who will run the restaurant?" Marco asked. Arthur looked at Clara. "I need someone who understands what this job actually is. It isn't about upselling wine or catering to egos. It's about service. It's about taking care of people, both the guests and the staff. Clara, I am formally offering you the position of general manager of the Obsidian." Clara's eyes went wide. "Me? But I'm just a server. I don't have a business degree." "You just managed 4 millionaires into cleaning a floor," Arthur pointed out with a wry smile. "I think you can handle a scheduling spreadsheet. The starting salary is $120,000 a year, plus full benefits and stock options, and you get to fire anyone who treats the staff with disrespect. Do we have a deal?" Clara looked at the empty restaurant. She imagined it not as a place of torment, but as a place she could control, a place where she could protect the other servers, just like Arthur had protected her. She took a deep breath. "I need a week. For Toby." "Take 2, Arthur said. "Marco can hold down the fort." "Then yes," Clara smiled. And it was a real smile, bright and unburdened. "I accept." "Excellent." Arthur tapped his cane on the floor. "Marco, lock up. Clara, go home. Your life starts now." Arthur Blackwood turned and walked out of the restaurant. He didn't look back. He simply stepped out into the Chicago night, a guardian lion returning to his den, leaving peace in his wake. Clara sat for a moment longer. She picked up the heavy, dirty apron she had worn all night. She folded it neatly and placed it on the table. It was a relic of a past life. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked to the door. "Good night, boss," Marco called out from the bar, raising a glass to her. "Good night, Marco," she laughed. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cold wind hit her face, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel biting. It felt fresh. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. It rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Clara," Toby mumbled. "Is everything okay? It's late. Did the car break down again?" Clara leaned against the brick wall of the restaurant, looking up at the stars that were struggling to shine through the city lights. "No, Toby," she said, her voice trembling with joy. "The car didn't break down. Nothing is broken anymore." "What do you mean?" her brother asked, sounding more awake now. "You sound different." "I am different," Clara said. "Listen to me closely, Toby. I need you to pack a bag tomorrow morning, and not just an overnight bag. Pack everything." "Why? Are we being evicted?" Panic crept into his voice. "No," Clara said, tears streaming down her face, hot and fast. "We're going to New York. I found a specialist, Toby, the best orthopedic surgeon in the country. I looked him up online months ago, remember? The one we said we could never afford? Yeah, Dr. Aris. But Clara, that's impossible." "Not anymore," Clara sobbed, laughing at the same time. "I have the money, Toby. I have it all. You're going to have the surgery. You're going to walk again without that cane. I promise you. It's over. The struggle is over." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, the sound of quiet weeping. "Clara, are you serious?" "I'm serious. I'm coming home, Toby. I'm coming home, and everything is going to be okay." Clara hung up the phone and wiped her eyes. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp night air. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and began to walk. She didn't walk with the hurried, anxious shuffle of a woman afraid of the world. She walked with her head high, her stride long and purposeful. Behind her, through the window of the obsidian, the lights dimmed, but the reflection in the glass showed a woman who was no longer just a waitress. She was a survivor. She was a manager, and most importantly, she was the sister who had kept her promise. The sharks had come to feast, but they had forgotten the most important rule of the jungle. You never corner a woman who has nothing left to lose, especially when she has a lion watching her back. And that is the story of how 4 arrogant millionaires learned the hard way that money is a tool, not a weapon. They thought they could buy silence, but they ended up paying for their own humiliation. Clara got her justice, her brother got his surgery, and the city of Chicago learned that Arthur Blackwood is always watching. It's a powerful reminder. Treat everyone with respect, whether they are the CEO or the person pouring your water. You never know who is sitting at the next table, and you never know when the tables will turn. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you want to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let me know in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Clara's shoes? See you in the next video.